Let's welcome who many people consider America's #1 confidence coach from the state of Florida, Dr. Keith Johnson. God bless you, Dr. Johnson.
It's great to be here with you guys.
And he is the author of the LQ Solution, Influence, Impact, and Increase. I like all three of those. What's this book about? Why did you write it?
Well, I've been consumed with the last 15 years of studying basically the unleashing of human potential. And as you really study that subject, scientists in that realm have come up with what you said. They came up with the IQ test. And if you take the IQ test, they say that however you score on that test, that is a predictor of how well a person will influence others, how well a person will impact the world, and really how much of an income that person will receive in their life. Well, my thought was, I've seen a lot of people throughout life that have great intellectual abilities, but they've achieved nothing. They've done nothing. And then they came out with, well, they said it's not all IQ. It must also be a little bit about EQ, which is your emotional quotient. And, you know, as I studied human beings, I've seen that there are people who have great emotional stability, but yet they've never really influenced anybody. They've never really made an impact in the world, and that they're broke, you know. And then, of course, we have the GQ, you know, GQ magazine that teaches you how to dress well. And, you know, I think a lot of people in the church, boy, we know how to dress for church. You know?
Yes.
But, you know, you could dress real nice, but really never have anything, never do anything. And so I've come to the conclusion over 15 years of studying human potential that it's not your IQ, it's not your EQ, it's not your GQ. Really, the bottom line, it's a person's LQ that's going to determine whether or not they make a great influence in other people's lives, whether or not they're really going to impact the sphere of influence that God has placed them in, and whether or not they're really going to make a substantial income or not in life.
Okay, so everybody's saying, what in the world is L in the Q? Is it love? Is it life? Is it leadership? What is the L?
L stands for your leadership quotient. And I simply put a definition to it. Your leadership quotient is your measurement of your ability to positively influence somebody else to come join you in the attainment of a desired outcome.
You know, I think of one of the classic stories to me, because I know an individual that's very much like this, is the Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer got all those people out there whitewashing that fence, and that was amazing to me.
No,
how he did that.
He had the LQ, didn't he?
He had the LQ, didn't he, as a little boy?
Yes, he sure did. And for me, what I see really in the world today is we see that society is going downhill because we have a crisis in leadership. As a matter of fact, recent studies say that 68% of Americans are saying, you know, we need major help in leadership. We don't trust leaders anymore. And we also see that that's affected inside the church, that we have a major crisis in the leaders across America. And for me, I found early on when I pastored a church out in the middle of no man's land, a little community, about 100 people, and as I grew that church to about 150 people, I kept hitting an invisible ceiling on that church. And it was in that moment that I discovered, you know what, I'm a highly spiritual person, but I lacked leadership abilities. And you can be a pastor of a church, but if you don't have leadership skills, that you'll always hit that invisible lid on your ministry.
So that right there, I was going to ask this question because most people have heard of the concept of natural born leader. So I was going to ask, can leadership be learned? Can it be acquired? Can it be taught?
I say both. Leadership is both caught and leadership is taught, both. For instance, in my life, I was born in a really messed up situation. I wasn't born in Leave It to Beaver family. My father was a member of Satan's Escorts, which is a motorcycle Harley-Davidson club.
Kind of like a Hell's Angels?
Like a Hell's Angels, yes.
Yeah.
And so I never had anybody around me to model leadership, so I never caught it. But what happened to me is in that church, I started to learn that I had to learn some leadership skills and build my leadership skills, and that I could learn it. Now, my spiritual father, whose name is John Kelly, his father built some of the biggest bridges in America. So his father was a natural leader, and so for my spiritual father, leadership was caught for him. And so as we traveled around together, I started to notice that he does all these leadership things intuitively. And I would say, hey, you practice the law of the lens, and he looks at me. I said, hey, you practice the law of the hamburger. He looks at me. Because see, it was caught, it was natural for him.
Wait, what are those two laws?
For me.
Explain that real quickly. You got me curious.
The two laws.
Those two that you said, hey, you practice this law and that law.
Oh, the law of the hamburger. The law of the hamburger is just,
I like hamburgers. I want to hear about this.
The law of the hamburger is real simply. It's like if you want people to perform better in your organization or your ministry, is you got to bring feedback. Feedback is a breakfast of champions. And so what I find is so many times we settle for mediocrity because we don't want to bring feedback to people to help increase their performance. And we don't do that because we know inside the church most people are insecure. And if we dare to bring feedback, you know, they'll pack their bags and go to the next church. And so what I use is the hamburger principle, and it's this. It's the bun is praise. And whenever you want to bring feedback, you always start off with praise. Hey, Bob, you're doing a great job on those cameras. Thank you so much for coming in and running those cameras. You're doing a great job. But then you got to bring the feedback. You know, Bob, we have a kind of a principle around here. We believe in dressing for success. And there's a certain code that we ask you to dress as a camera owner or camera operator. So can you please just kind of up your dress a little bit? Hey, by the way, Bob, let me tell you something. You are one of the best camera guys behind because you smile all the time.
So now you're adding the other bun.
So now I'm adding the other bun. It's praise, feedback, praise.
I like that.
And once I learned that tool, Marcus, I've never had anybody that I've helped coach to take them to the next level. I've never had anybody really get mad at me and just storm out of my office.
I don't know, what was that other, the principle of the lens? What did you say?
The law of the lens, yeah.
The law of the lens. Okay, what's that one?
The law of the lens is really what I call really looking at everybody through the lens of love, and really giving love and giving value to other people all the time, and that whole dynamic of trying to keep everybody in your circle of love. Those who you keep in your circle of love will help you. Those who you exclude from your circle of love will eventually hurt you.
Wow.
So look at people through the laws, through the lens of God's love.
So isn't the God component an integral part of everything we're talking about? I mean, really being connected to Him through this process?
Oh, it's huge. See, one of the things that people don't really realize is that most people don't see themselves as a leader. Now, see, most people think, even pastors I found, when I start talking to pastors, I'm talking about mega churches. I start talking about them, about their leadership ability. They'll say, I'm not a leader. And what I find is so many people, they don't see themselves as leaders. But the reality is when God comes into our heart, we get God's DNA on the inside of us. And the reason why we don't see ourselves as a leader, I've discovered, is because we don't see God as a leader. And God is the ultimate leader. We see Him leading in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God what? God created. So the first revelation God gave of Himself was that of creator. Why? Because the first revelation God wants us to get of us is that we have the creative abilities of God to take something that's in a mess and make it beautiful. Yeah. And so we have that LQ inside of us. But here's the challenge I think we face at the church, is that we failed to develop leaders that we send out in the marketplace. Whether it's in religion, whether it's in business, whether it's in the media, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in education, and all those different spheres, including government, we failed to equip leaders to go out into the marketplace to bring change. And here's the challenge that we face. I think we've been consumed with developing professional churchgoers instead of training people to be professional leaders of transformation.
Okay, quickly, we're running out of time. You talk about in the book 3 types of leadership. What are they?
Well, there are 3 different types that I see, and I explain that leaders are agents of change. And so if you take a pot of boiling water and you heat it up, and if you stick a carrot in the water, what happens to the carrot? The carrot goes soft, doesn't it? Well, God's called us to change the environment, and what I see is a lot of leaders, they get thrown into an environment and in a heated situation. Instead of staying strong, they get weak and they get limp, and they don't bring the change. So I tell everybody, don't be a carrot head. And then number two, the type of leader I find is what I call eggheads. You take a hot boiling pan of water, put an egg in it, and what happens to the egg? The egg gets hard from the inside out. That's like a lot of people in church. Right in church, they get hurt, they get wounded, and they get bitter from the inside out, and they get hard. And if your heart gets hard, you can't be an agent of change in the environment. But finally, here's what I say. God wants to raise up coffee. When you put coffee in the hot boiling water, the coffee changes the environment. The environment doesn't change the coffee.
Wow, that is so good. And then finally, you also talk about myths of leadership. What are some of the myths?
To me, one of the biggest myths is that leaders are just born. I mean, I see that so many times, and they ask me that so many times, are leaders just born? I say, yes, they're born every single day. I believe that leaders are made, and every believer has the potential to become a leader. And I break it down real simple in the book. I say, listen, they say, what is a leader? It's easy to be a leader. Here's my definition of leader. A leader is simply an average person. And I know we have many people who are listening in the audience today. You say, how many of you think you're average people? Everybody's average. But here's the thing. All you got to do to be a leader is be just a little bit better than the average man. That the average man looks to you and wants to follow you or wants to help you in the achievement of your desired outcome.
That is so good. This is a book that Marcus Lamb wants to read. And as Joni said, she didn't take every CD home. I don't read every book, but I have books constantly that I read at night as my devotion. And so I want to read this myself.